True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I've really got to work on that transition. I'm not exactly sure how to make it go smoother, but thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned before, we are on to the Idaho 4 case, amongst other cases, but definitely each week we will be talking about the Idaho 4 and sort of what's in the news about it. Specifically, I want to touch on today the DoorDash driver. But first, I do want to, for people who might have never heard about the Idaho 4 case, there were four beautiful students in Moscow, Idaho, that were murdered viciously on November 13th, 2022. The accused killer is Brian Koberger, who was attending a PhD program in an adjacent state, Pullman, Washington, which was really only about 10 minutes away from the house located at 1122 King Road, where these students were murdered. Each of these segments that we do, they're dedicated really to the memory of Xana, Ethan, Maddie, and Kaylee. And this channel is a fact-based channel. I'm a retired FBI special agent, spent 25 years with the FBI and 3 years in law enforcement prior to that as an agent. And so we try to bring facts here. That's how we discuss things. So let's get into the DoorDash driver. I think it's really important to point out, and I'm going to put up a few graphics here. Let's see. I want to put up this graphic first. Hopefully you guys can see this, but essentially we have known about the DoorDash driver since the very first time the probable cause affidavit, which was authored actually by a police officer in Moscow with very little time on the force, but mentored certainly by the FBI, who was completely immersed in this investigation. At one point, 60 agents, FBI agents, were assigned, and of course, state police, local police, and Lord knows the number of analysts with the FBI that logged time on this matter. But very early on, at the beginning, we knew about the DoorDash driver. We knew Xana Kernodle received a DoorDash delivery. There's actually a photo, and I did not download that, and I should have, of the delivery that she took from Jack in the Box, or that was the vendor, and it was delivered. We also knew very early on that the DoorDash driver was a female. That was revealed to us by Steve Gonsalves. That's Kaylee Gonsalves's father who's been very much involved in this case. And I think it's interesting, and I'm so grateful that he has been so intricately involved early. We've seen in other cases, most recently, where social media can just run amok and can become the narrative. And I think he did a good job early on, pressing for answers, which really he didn't get that many, but at least pressing for justice for these four students from the very beginning. And I think it helped the public to understand who these young victims were. It painted a picture of them. We saw their faces, we saw videos, and we all fell in love with them. And I always say when people contact me and say, how do I get the public to care about my loved one who is missing, or to care about this murder trial, and to help get justice served, I always say, please, make your loved one come alive. And Steve did a good job with that. And so very early on, we knew the DoorDash driver was a female. Now, I want to bring up something that was very interesting that happened early on in this case, and we see it happening all over again. When I look back at my literally thousands and thousands of tweets about the Idaho 4 from the inception of the case, not coming on at the end, but literally coming on November 13th on this case and reporting on it and social media and Main Street media, when you look at it, we see themes repeating themselves. And one theme very early on was that the DoorDash driver was involved in the murder. Does anybody remember this? For all of you, and I know many of you are here, that followed this case just as intently as I did, certainly. There's really millions of people possibly that followed it fairly closely, but certainly thousands that followed it intricately, like I'm talking about. And if you look back at Newsweek covered this so well, News Nation covered it so well. And if you look back at one point, the DoorDash driver, people actually thought, when I say people, social media started running amok, that the DoorDash driver was Brian Koberger. I'm not even kidding you. You can go back and look. The DoorDash driver, they said, was Brian Koberger, that he was a DoorDash driver. That's how off and askew social media could get. And if you look at the different creators that were running this line of rubbish, hopefully you will stay with a fact-based channel to follow this case as it starts to get more and more in the media. You're going to see, and as the trial date approaches, you're going to see more and more people start following it. So I just hope that you stick with, there's several fact-based channels that are truly facts, not running with a narrative that might help them grow, as we've recently seen, not running with falsehoods to get you to watch like it's a soap opera. And, oh, that's exciting. Look over here. Not those kinds of channels. And so we saw that flying around, that Brian Koberger was the DoorDash driver and that the DoorDash driver was somehow involved. Well, fairly quickly, to address those issues, a statement was made by the authorities, and it made it very clear that the DoorDash driver was not involved in this in any way. And many of us were screaming at the top of our lungs, the DoorDash driver is not involved. One merely needs to read the probable cause affidavit, which I have always said is the holy grail, if you will, of facts when it came to this case. You really didn't have to look that much further than that affidavit, because unlike most affidavits that might be 2 to 5 pages long, this stretched, I think it was over 20 pages long. And it really painted a picture of at least a cursory view of a lot of the evidence they had. There's a lot more evidence out there than was just in that affidavit, but certainly that affidavit proved a gold mine for understanding the case. In addition, you may remember that about this time, people started also blaming, and we're seeing this being a repeated narrative, started blaming Bethany Funk, who's in the blue shirt and black bottom, shorts there in the middle, and Dylan Mortensen, who is in the flowered kind of Hawaiian dress on the end. And then, of course, you see the victims there, Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana. If you look and see what happened at the beginning of this case, and it's been sort of a pervasive in and out, is that Bethany and Dylan somehow were involved in the murder of these kids. Literally, that it was a conspiracy, that it was a setup. Nobody could really put themselves in the shoes of Dylan and understand the initial terror, the fact that she was, I believe, in a fog from drinking, the fact that now we know she hooked up with Bethany, went downstairs, so now she's a floor away, that she was otherwise occupied, and it never crossed her mind to think that her fellow roommates were massacred in adjoining rooms. Nevertheless, to twist that into they were some sort of conspirators in murder, we still see that flying around. We saw it early, we've seen it in the middle, and we see it coming back around the mountain again, that they are somehow involved because everybody's upset, right? They're upset that Xana was laying right there, that people saw her and they took her for being passed out drunk. Listen, if that has happened before in the past, that makes a lot of sense to think your roommate, your buddy that went out and tied one on would be laying there on the floor, passed out drunk, way over the fact that you would think they were massacred with a K-bar knife by an insane killer, and I would argue fledgling serial killer. That wouldn't come to your mind. Even if you saw somebody in a mask and somebody that went in the house, certainly she saw that. I very much believe she saw Brian Koberger. If you look at the description, she describes it. She describes the height, the general build. She describes those big bushy eyebrows, which, like I said, they trim those suckers down for court. But the eyebrows do fit in this case. And so in any event, they are not to blame. And that, as I said a long time ago, and I'm right after it happened, the DoorDash driver isn't to blame. But now so much has come out on the DoorDash driver. I've been tweeting about it. A lot of channels and other people have been talking about it. I do want to say that I appreciate particular accounts, including Plunder, including Matt Blanc, including The Docket. These are more Twitter X accounts that actually they spend the time and the money. I'm not sure how expensive it really is, but I know sometimes when you buy things by pages, there's a printing fee. And to go ahead and find by Freedom of Information Act these documents and tape and things. And I really appreciate them because for somebody like me, who I'm going to be doing the show now 3 times a week, but I have pretty much a full-time jobs on the outside. So it's wonderful when other people do that. And I always like to give them credit. In this case, Plunder was the one that actually first produced a face, a name, which I'm not going to say the name here because it's amazing how horrible people are to these young people and to this woman who was completely and totally innocent in this case. She was in the wrong place at a wrong time and happened to get the call for the DoorDash, which put her in a position to be a witness. There's nothing more complicated to it than that. But we, for the first time, heard her voice. We saw her face, and we began to learn about some issues she had, driving issues she had. In fact, on one night, a night she was pulled over, I've seen her pulled over for having not proof of insurance, and um, I saw it happen within 30 minutes. So she gets pulled over, and then she gets pulled over again. So only 30 minutes later, from one state to another. So it's pretty interesting that essentially she has a bad driving situation. She has issues when she's driving. She has issues with maintaining insurance. She has issues, I think, even with the registration. I think she came up with the registration, but she drives other people's vehicles and things. So, long story short, she is not a very good driver. I joke around that Brian Koberger got pulled over also twice in one trip. And remember, those, in my opinion, were not pullovers that were managed by the FBI, that were orchestrated by the FBI. Initially, I really did think they were, but I came to know that definitely he was in the middle of driving down a highway there in Indiana that was part of a big interdiction effort that was going on. And when you do interdiction efforts, being a part of them, you do efforts where you pull over multiple vehicles that have out-of-state licenses, or if there's anything that looks sort of out of the ordinary, you're going to pull over multiple vehicles during that time that you're running interdiction. So that's why he was pulled over, and that's why he was pulled over twice. He was interdicted twice because of those out-of-place tags that were going down their highway. But nevertheless, when you look at this case and the DoorDash driver, yes, she's not a good driver. Okay. I mean, she just gets pulled over too often. She's not good at maintaining insurance, I would argue, in large part because her rates are probably horrible. When she was the film that we've all seen of her in the booking room, that was in September of 2024. So it was before all of this happened. We know of another instance that's in December, I believe 9th or 29th, sorry. And I'm not sure what date that is going to turn out to be. I haven't seen those records yet, but we know there's another date that exists with her, again, having driver's issues. But this is the point of all of this. The most significant traffic violation is for driving under the influence. How will that affect her testimony? Well, first of all, the instance had nothing to do with the night of November 13th, 2022. None of the times she was pulled over, and certainly not the DUI instance, had anything to do with that time frame. So to say that she was under the influence when she was saw Brian Koberger, which I'm taking her words, I've seen her on tape twice now saying, I am testifying against Brian Koberger. Actually, she doesn't even say Koberger. She calls him Brian, which I found interesting. But, maybe she doesn't, the last name is convoluted. I mean, I'm Coffindaffer, all right? Koberger. It's a big, long German name. And so maybe it's just easier for her to remember Brian. But nevertheless, the reason I think she keeps making these spontaneous utterances, if you've heard them, she's really sad when she makes them. I mean, she's sad about her situation, that she knows she's going to have legal costs. She's going to be put in the drunk tank. It could affect the fact that she's a DoorDash driver, right? All these things are running through her mind, I'm sure. But the big thing, I think, and the reason she says it in the back of the squad car, the reason she says it in the booking room, is because she knows how important she is to the case. She's an eyewitness to his presence. Dylan Mortensen is too, but in more of a convoluted way because he was in a mask. He was covered, completely covered. And so for that reason, just this area showed. And because of that, and the fact that we know she was drinking and she was under the influence. So for that reason, of course, the defense is going to have a heyday trying to discredit Dylan's eyewitness account. But I don't think they had that problem with the DoorDash driver looking over, seeing the vehicle, what she saw, when she saw it, if their eyes made contact. There's a lot we still don't know. We definitely know she saw him because she says that. And I think she'll repeat that on the stand. I've heard her say it twice. There's probably no reason she's not going to say that again on the stand. And I think she understands the gravity of the importance of her testimony. So that brings me to the question, the burning question that everybody wants answered is, how is this really going to affect her testimony? And I'm going to draw from my experience with witnesses on the stand in cases I've had, specifically meth cases, large cocaine cases. In both of these instances, we had to put up, and a big gang case we had where we indicted 50 gang members and we had an informant on the inside. Listen, our informant, the guy I ran, let me tell you what, he had a horrible rap sheet. He was pretty much constantly high on marijuana anyway. Terrible, terrible when you looked at his substance abuse issues. Many other cases. I mean, I always say this, you wish you could have an informant that was a priest or a squeaky clean individual on the stand, but birds of a feather. You can't get into a gang without typically having a gang member. You can't infiltrate cartel without somebody that is inside of that cartel, or at least working for that cartel in a capacity. You just can't. So you have to have people that have warts and are muddy, but you still use them. You use them to obtain information. I'd like to say every time our informants went in, we had them wired up, but there's just some instances that were far too dangerous. We could not risk that wire being detected. There's other devices that we used, but also that you could have in your hand, and other things that looked inconspicuous. But we didn't always have recordings or that corroboration. What we had, of course, was us watching the individual go in. So in this case, what I guess I'm trying to say is you have to disclose all that. Look, if the prosecution had this information, had her prior arrest for this DUI information, I doubt tickets, but certainly this would have come out in court. It's kind of a tragedy that it came out this way, and I say that only because I really feel sorry for the DoorDash driver. She didn't want to be wrapped up in this. She didn't want to be a witness to this, but circumstances put her there, and she realizes that the gravity of this case, the gravity of somebody like Brian Koberger, if justice isn't served for some reason, I loved what Dr. Bricata said, and I put this on my Twitter. And actually, next time I do this case next week, I'm going to put up the short clip. It's 40 seconds or something like that, about what Dr. Bricata says about if Brian Koberger would be released for some reason, if there was some travesty of justice in his opinion. Again, Brian Koberger is innocent in a court of law, certainly. But we've seen a lot of evidence, not only what's in the probable cause affidavit, but the Dateline specials, both the Dateline special from about 2 years ago. What was that called? It was called, I think, just 1122 King Road. I was in that one. I can tell you Dateline does their homework. They had a lot of information. That's when we first found out about the knife sheath. They corroborated it. They knew it was true, and they said he purchased it on Amazon 2 years ago. That's when Dateline said that. You guys should go back and look at that and watch 1122 King Road. And then most recently, there was a second Dateline special done again. Again, they had amazing informant, basically, that was giving them information regarding the case. We all know that the information was good because basically Judge Hippler is telling us it's good. He is angry. He's fit to be tied. There was a gag order in place, and he is livid that information was disclosed. And he wants heads to roll. And they are literally running an investigation to determine who leaked the tapes of the vehicle, Brian Koberger's vehicle, coming and going from the King Road, Queen, all around that area. You've probably seen the film. I've put it on my Twitter before. I believe I put that on my Twitter. I might not have, but it's any place you want to look for it. That is the big tape that was released, the video that was released, that will likely lead to figuring out who disclosed this information to Dateline. I wouldn't look for Dateline to say anything. I think they would rather serve time for contempt of court than reveal sources. And it's pretty interesting because the judge didn't even really necessarily go after Dateline. A lot of people, a lot of judges, and a lot of people, I'm kind of changing, right? Because now I'm in the media. Sort of the sanctity of the media being able to present facts to the public and to present what they find out to the public. I've always said, people like Chris Cuomo and Ashley Banfield and Vargas, listen, they've been in this business for decades. Of course, they're going to have sources. Of course, they're going to have law enforcement friendlies and fire department friendlies and friendlies in politics. Of course, this is what they have done for a living. I've talked before about the FBI. We have to have 3 viable informants, not 3 informants coming in and saying nothing, but informants that are contributing to cases, contributing to our priorities. Terrorism right now, #1 priority, and almost always has been. So you've got to have that. That's your responsibility. And in journalism, you have the same thing. So I found it interesting that Judge Hippler doesn't seem to really be focusing on pressuring them. But I tell you, he is livid at either the law enforcement person, and I don't think it's going to be an FBI agent. We'll see. I'm sure if it ends up being, everybody will say, see, Jennifer said it wasn't, but I don't think it's going to be an FBI agent. I really don't. I think it's going to be somebody locally, or the spouse, or, close friend that maybe somebody else was confiding in, or somebody on the legal side of things, a clerk, somebody that was privy to all these documents that are sealed. Remember, these are sealed, that leaked it. But I think they're going to find out. I haven't seen anything on it. If anybody else has, let me know. I look at that docket all the time. I look at it about every other day, trying to find new documents. And I think it's funny because other people sometimes find stuff before I find it. And I say, how did they find it? I'm looking too, but they must be looking right after I look, or, I don't look every single day or every hour of every day. But nevertheless, that's a big deal. So we know a lot about the case based on the Dateline. I've been posting a couple of selfies that were taken. There's the famous selfie, but then there's another selfie that Brian Koberger took where he's in black hooded. It's on my Twitter, and specifically, I think, sort of mimicking the famous sweatshirted figure that was Ted Bundy. In fact, if you look on Amazon, there's Ted Bundy, those black dark hoodies. So in any event, we've gotten a lot of information from Dateline. But not to digress, and to circle back around to the point of this video, the DoorDash driver, I think, will be called to the stand. I think she'll testify that she saw Brian Koberger there. I think she'll be able to more or less put the window that she was there based on the time she dropped off the meal, particularly if she took a photograph. Often the DoorDash guys, and gals, they take a picture to prove they dropped it off. I could see her doing that. There's no evidence whatsoever that she was under the influence during this time frame. No evidence of that. So there's no reason to doubt her credibility. And even with Dylan, like I said, there's individuals who hit the witness stand all the time that testify about times that they were drunk or under the influence or had drank or had smoked weed or whatever the case may be. And they're still good witnesses from the standpoint of if you can corroborate their information that they gave. And for instance, we know Brian Koberger purchased the mask. We know he had the build that he had. I'm sorry. We know that he had those big bushy eyebrows. So if she would have said, she being Dylan Mortensen, that a guy came in and they were short and they looked maybe 5'1", 5'2", and they were black, obviously her words would not match up with the corroborative evidence, and she would be a horrible witness. That's not what happened here. And so I think this DoorDash driver, I think their testimony, if it's what she says it is, which was, I have to testify against Brian, I saw Brian. If that's the testimony, the state is going to want her. And the defense can try to use her past. I don't think it's going to fly. I don't think it's going to fly because it doesn't show anything about her being drunk or under the influence on November 13th, 2022, when the students that were living at 1122 King Road and Ethan, who was visiting 1122 King Road, were massacred. All right, everyone. I'm going to keep these lives always pretty short. I really appreciate you all being here. After I get off my live, I always look at your statements, comments, and I'll try to address them. It kicks me off at a certain amount of time, but I have a little bit of time that I can go ahead and read these, and I'm going to do that. I appreciate y'all being here, and may justice be served for the Idaho 4.